I'm gonna show you the basic concepts every beginner should know to play better chess. This is what is called the center. If you include these four squares, that's the extended center. So you should try and occupy the center with pawns and control it also with pieces. So let's say e4, e5, knight f3, attacking the pawn, knight c6, defending the pawn. If we go bishop b5, that's what is called the Ruy Lopez or the Spanish opening. Now, why is it better to go knight f3 and not bishop c4? Just to illustrate, even after bishop b5, which is even worse, black will go queen g5, and if a4, just to illustrate the point, white can take the pawn on g2, and in this case, white is not going to lose the rook because white has queen f3, but you see how the bishops are important because they defend the two pawns. Now, a more important reason of why you should develop the knights first and then the bishops is because, as shown in this example, the knight is a much slower piece. So in this example, if it's white to move, you can take the knight with only one move. Now, if you wanted to take this bishop with the knight, you have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. 6 moves to get, even if you go this way, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Bishop takes one move to go from corner to corner. The knight takes 6 moves. So that is really the main reason why you should develop the knights before the bishops, because the knight is a slower piece that takes longer to get into the game, while the bishop you can get into the game in one single move. So talking about knights and bishops, you might ask, okay, so is the knight better? Is the bishop better? Well, that depends. If the game is open, the bishops are better, as shown in this example. There's a lot of room for the bishop to move. So basically, when the center, as shown here, let's go back, the center, meaning all these squares, is open, the bishops are better. When the center is closed, as in this example, the knights are better. Especially if the pawns, black and the bishop, are the same color of the bishop you have. Because if the pawns are, let's say, of the opponents, maybe you could even sacrifice the bishop for one of the pawns. But in this particular case, the bishop is being blocked by its own pawns. So there really isn't any way for white to get into black's camp, right? However, because obviously the knight can jump over pieces, the knight can go to d7, b6, and a4 and be in white's camp. And you can even do it through h5. So let's see how we can do that. So we have to go king e7, knight a6, knight c7, knight e8, knight g7, and then knight h5. You are already in the opponent's camp. So this example shows, it's a bit of a drastic example, but it shows very clearly why in close positions you want to keep the knights, and in open positions you want to keep the bishops. So they're both great pieces. It depends on the pawn structure. You know, is the center open? Is the center closed? Can the center be open? Can the center be kept closed? The other example is, if you're white, okay, so you have, what is better? Is it better to have a queen and a bishop? Is it better to have a queen and a knight? Is it better to have a rook and a bishop? Is it better to have a rook and a knight? So this position, even though it's artificial and it's not super great because the pawn on e5 kind of blocks the bishop, to illustrate the point is a good example. So if you're white, you have the knight and the rook. Again, in chess, nothing is written in stone. Well, a few things are, but anyway, as a general rule, you want to have rook and knight. I mean, rook and bishop against rook and knight. But on the flip side, you want to keep the queen and the knight, because typically queen and knight are better than queen and bishop because they complement each other better. So if you're white in this position, the right move would be to take the rook. If black takes white's queen, then you have the intermediate move. Rook takes pawn, king takes, and then you take the queen, and you are a pawn up, and you should win this game. So the main idea is you take the rook, and then you keep. Well, it's hard to keep it now because but you get the idea. You should keep the knight and the queen because knight and queen are better than bishop and queen as a general rule. Now, on the other hand, if you're black and it's your move, then you should, let's say you play as white, you play c3. If you're black, you should take the queen and maybe play rook e6 and keep the rooks because as a general rule, bishop and rook is better than knight and rook. So again, to summarize, queen and knight is better than queen and bishop. Rook and bishop is better than rook and knight. And part of the reason is, obviously this bishop can only move in white squares, but the rook and the bishop kind of make the movement of the queen. Not 100% because you still need the white bishop, but you get the idea. They complement each other better because they're both long-range pieces. And in this next, wait a minute, where is it? In this example, you can see that. So there's more harmony between the rook, even though the knight is in a very advanced position, it's kind of threatening. The bishop is attacking and also defending, and white to move, it will be checkmate. So rook and bishop are better because they're long range pieces. So again, going back to why queen and knight is better than queen and bishop. So in this position, you can see, let's just draw the arrows of the queen moving like a bishop. The queen and the bishop kind of step on each other because they have the same moves. They're kind of redundant. So the bishop goes all the way here, the queen goes all the way here. So they're kind of in terms of movement on top of each other, right? This could be beneficial, especially if you have the bishop down here. You can do what is called a battery, but they are redundant to each other. Now, on the other hand, if you have queen and knight, the knight controls, especially in this case, a lot of white squares, while the queen, controls a lot of the dark squares. So they work better together. So this is why, as a general rule, you want to keep the queens because queen and knight are better than queen and bishop. So this is one of the coolest examples that shows a particular you should remember this position. So obviously in this position, black is a rook up, but this is what is called a theoretical drawn position. This is a drawn position, but keep in mind you need the rook here. So in this position, white would check. Black cannot go into h8 because that would be checkmate. So black has to go into f8. You want to check on h7, not on d7, because then that cuts the action of the rook and you can get out. So you want to check on h7, and then if black moves to g8, then you repeat the position. If they go to e8, you check again, and they cannot go to either of those squares, because if black goes to e8 now, that will be checkmate, and if he goes to h8, that will also be checkmate. So keep that in the back of your mind when you have a knight and a rook and you are in a losing game. That is a very important tactic to remember to draw when you're worse. Again, so one of the things, obviously this is a very open position. So this is very important to remember. With no other pieces on the board, there is no way for the knight to trap the bishop. However, the bishop can trap the knight, especially when you put the knight on the rim. Remember, they're saying a knight on the rim is grim. So the knight, another thing too, sometimes you forget, or some people don't remember that the knight moves from one color square to a different color square. So it moves from white squares to dark squares, from dark squares to white squares. So it is in a white square, so it's going to move to a dark square. So if you have a bishop in this position, this knight is obviously trapped. There is no way for the knight to move out. So a bishop can trap a knight by itself. There are situations where you can trap a bishop with a knight, but you need the help of pawns or the king. So go over this video. These simple ideas, I use them a lot in my teachings, in my own games. We actually did a members live stream where we went into more detail and depth in this concept. So, but I hope you learned some from this video. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Consider becoming a member to support the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.